Hey people, Sleepy Reader here. Let me see if I can, and pardon me, I'm going to try and go handheld. Laziness abounds. Let me see if I can quickly go over some of the other stuff I've been reading recently. Let's see if I can figure out what my thoughts on them are. I actually really enjoyed reading Twilight Children. I had heard that it was a bit disappointing, and I can see exactly why. I loved it in the first issue or two, and then it seemed to maybe struggle in a way to deliver on its science fiction story. But maybe if it had followed through a little more on the stories of the people, it would. I mean, because you kind of, even though there was a kind of a science fiction thing going on here, it really was more of a magical realism story. And in magical realism, I think the people are should be in the foreground and the magic kind of in the background. And when the sort of magical event became too much in the foreground, it's kind of where this one didn't work as well. But I still loved it. I mean, I still really enjoyed reading it, and I have no regrets in reading it. The art by Darwin Cook, the recently deceased Darwin Cook, was excellent, and it felt like I was reading a Love and Rockets comic book. I mean, even though the art was a slightly different style, it still kind of just captured that whole Love and Rockets world. And I think partially maybe there were, some layouts that were done by Gilbert Hernandez. They show some thumbnails by him in the back, which are very crude, but perhaps communicate it or represent some kind of communication between Hernandez and Cook. That so that it felt like, in a way, this comic was the best of both worlds, the best of Cook and the best of Hernandez in terms of the storytelling techniques visually. So I really ate it up. I think that I just wish a little more had been done with character, although a lot was done with character, and we do see some of the characters kind of changed at the end. And it was, I loved the quirkiness of the characters and how they never spelled out the quirkiness of the characters. They were just there doing their own kind of odd thing. So that it really felt like a piece of life, even though it was a science fiction story. So, yeah, I will probably reread this someday just to enjoy the parts. I suppose in a way the parts weren't as good as the whole, but the parts were darn good, and I really enjoyed it. Sort of similar art style here on the cover, not exactly the same, but Lumberjanes, Gotham Academy. I read this with my daughter, and we've been back on a Lumberjanes kick, reading some of the Lumberjanes that we missed. We didn't like, so we loved the initial Lumberjanes arc or two, and then there was this mermaid arc that really didn't work well for us. But now we're back on Lumberjanes, but this crossover with Gotham Academy felt quite weak. The art was cool, but the writing it felt like the writer was working too hard. Rather than kind of cutting to the chase of the good parts of the story, so to speak, I think it's a she, tried to fill in every little bit, every little moment, step by step till we get to our story. Maybe because she's trying to spread it out for 6 issues. But a lot of what she did was kind of show how she was able to, what's the right word? How she was able to mimic the shtick of each character. So it felt like she was trying too hard to sort of show that, but it sort of showed me that how quickly these quirky characters from Lumberjanes could become a kind of a shtick, a one-note character that is just repeated over and over again, which I haven't in the past felt in Lumberjanes itself, Although, looking back on it through the lens of reading this comic, I can see how each character has become kind of a shtick. And so I hope in the actual Lumberjanes book they manage to transcend that. As they brought in different writers and creators, that may be a problem. Because either you go too far afield from the characters or you stick too closely to the characters, and either one can be a problem. And maybe, there's some characters that make good ongoing series that can last for 40 years, and others that, maybe only need to be 10 or 12 issues. I don't know which Lumberjanes are, but this version of them in this comic made me uneasy. And I suppose to an extent they were doing the same thing with Gotham Academy. But I haven't kept up with Gotham Academy, so I'm less attached to those characters and less totally familiar with what they're all about. Although I have the general idea of who Maps and Olive is, and a little bit about the boyfriend, Olive, who's also Maps' brother. So yeah, I'm not going to get the next issue, I don't think, unless my daughter suddenly thinks she really wants it. But it's interesting to see what happens with these kinds of characters. I still highly recommend the first 8 issues of Lumberjanes if you're at all curious to try those out, either in the 2 trades, or I think now they have them in 1 hardback, because that makes up 1 story. Let's see, another one that was mildly disappointing. I was really looking forward to Saints. I still like Saints a lot, but I think I've been mentioning issue by issue how I'm losing track more and more of what's going on. And so this was their ultimate issue, unless they decide to come back and do some kind of sequel. And I just stopped keeping track of what was going on. Still a lot of really cool stuff, though. I don't at all regret reading this series. But I can't say that it ended that strongly, just because it was too confusing. And maybe, I have so much to read, but in an ideal world, I would go back and reread all of Saints together, because I liked it that much, and I want to see how it all fits and understand it better. And I really hope these guys go on to make more comics as a team or with other creators. And I still hope they get a different colorist. Okay, so those 2, Lumberjanes and Saints were, Lumberjanes in particular I didn't like, and the Saints was okay. But after that, I have some comics I really enjoyed a lot. Kaiju Max, I think, remains one of my favorite comics. I don't know if other people will like it. I gave the first trade to Matt, Wednesday Serial, because I thought it might be his cup of tea with black humor, but it didn't seem like humor to him, so I guess that kind of implies that this is not going to tickle everyone's funny bone. Not that he didn't enjoy it, but it's kind of... It very much is similar to a certain kind of TV show. And it's not surprising that Xander Cannon worked closely with Ellen Moore on Top 10, which also had that sort of ongoing TV show set in a weird setting kind of feeling to it. So, it kind of reminds me of some of the HBO shows that you might watch and such. But it still also just has a kind of thing going on that I feel like is only in comics. And even though it reminds me a bit of TV shows, it also just feels unique unto itself for me. And there was a lot of the clever twists and stuff are kind of low-key in a way, even though it's big monsters and crazy transformations and fights. There's just a lot of subtlety going on. I don't know how to explain it, but I love Kaiju Max, and this was another great issue. As with every issue, I have a little trouble starting up the issue, and as it goes along, I just build up more and more momentum for it, and I just find it more and more gripping, kind of funny and soulful and distressing, all in the same reading experience. Vision just goes from strength to strength. This is like, one could almost think of it as one of the best indie comics out there right now, even though it's not indie. And although I'm looking forward to Tom King doing more stuff at DC, I'm nervous that this is like his total strength here, and I just don't know if this kind of thing is gonna fly at DC. Certainly with Batman, I don't even expect him to go in such weird directions. I'm still looking forward to his Batman a lot, but I'm a bit sad that he's not going to be working for Marvel, because clearly they're letting him do something, that really in some ways has. I've never seen a Marvel comic book go in this particular direction before. Maybe some DC characters in Vertigo comics have gone a bit this way. It's a little bit like what, not really, but I mean, it's a little, in the daringness, a little bit of what we saw long ago with Grant Morrison and Animal Man, but this is much more sophisticated. It's not exploring the same material as Grant Morrison and Animal Man, except for the sense of a kind of screwed up character who's a superhero with his family, I guess, is part of what it made me think of Animal Man for. I love so many details of this, like where they're at an art gallery looking at some kind of Roy Lichtenstein kind of version of Disney characters, which now Marvel can do because they're owned by Disney, right? So there's no problem there. So anyway, wonderful comic. Get the trade if you're not on it now. I guess there's 4 more issues to go. Just one of the most great comic books out there right now. An interesting new comic is Midnight of the Soul by Howard Chaykin. And I'm not a huge Howard Chaykin fan, but this was recommended to me by Ryan C., who I know from Twitter and from he does a lot of comments on Comic Book Roundtable, and he writes criticism for a lot of comic book blogs. Anyway, he said this was his favorite of the week, and I can see why now that I've read it. It wasn't my favorite. Kaiju Max and Vision are tied for that. But I thought this was a really good comic. And it's really good in the writing. And most of the art is pretty good. It's got its awkward moments, and I'm just never going to totally love Howard Chaykin's inking style and things like that. And there's, to me, a certain kind of stiffness to his characters. I mean, there's a lot of personality in that face, I guess, but it just, I don't know, somehow his faces never quite work for me in getting my sympathy or my empathy. But this is a really well-written story about a, someone struggling with the demons of World War II and freeing concentration camps, and just all he had to do to fight his way across the continent, I guess. And what is his life afterwards? And it goes into a, alcoholic, failed writer, film noir kind of cliche. I say it's a cliche, but it feels fresh here. It feels like a trope that Chaykin is doing his own thing with, and it's quite interesting. And there's a very, possibly misogynistic twist, but it just fits with this kind of story. And there's some interesting visual things going on here apart from my problems with his figures that I think are very interesting. And it left me at the end being unsure where the story's going, but I feel like it's going to be a wild ride. Ryan tells me it's going to be a 5-issue series, so I think I'll take it the whole ride unless I suddenly hate next issue. But this was a real pleasant surprise. I was expecting Paper Girls to be good, and it was. It's it continues to be just this odd science fiction comic that is also now also about modern times, as it is about the 80s. The 80s are meeting the modern times, and this character Erin is meeting herself, and it's pretty fun. The art is great, the coloring is great. I mean, it's all been said before. I like every little touch about it. The science fiction parts, the parts about small bits of human life and everything. So it's very cool, and we're clearly going to get more twists, more crazy time travel and other stuff going on. So I just really look forward to sitting back and seeing what Cliff Chiang and Brian K. Vaughan will give me each month, or each month that they do put out new issues. So crazy stuff. Another one, I often think about whether to read things as trades or whether to read things as individual issues, but I think I'm enjoying this a lot as it unfolds as an individual issues. And I think Kaiju Max in particular, I think would be too much to take all at once, and maybe that was, I didn't think of it when I gave him the trade, but that was maybe part of the problem with giving Matt a whole trade, and then he sat down and read it all in one day. Whereas I read this, I guess, over the course of a year. I read 6 issues. I think it may be bi-monthly. I don't know. Anyway, over a course of a long period of time, shotgunning these issues would be very hard. I think Vision will be very good as a trade, but I'm guessing the experience will be a bit different. But it is written in such a way that it feels like it'll more naturally feel like chapters in a book. And who knows with the Howard Chaykin, probably will make a good trade. We'll read like a noir crime novel, and we'll all fit together well. Anyway, that's just some of the stuff I've been thinking of lately. And maybe, on that issue of trades, maybe I enjoyed Twilight Children more because I was reading it in a trade. It kind of, the end, it was only 4 issues, but 4 long issues, I guess. So the 4th issue would have maybe weighed more heavily in my reading experience if it had been spaced out over a period of 4 months. And I got to that 4th issue, and I really expected, fireworks. There were kind of fireworks, but I really might have had a different expectation. I don't know. But also, I've been forewarned by my friends who read it ahead of me. Okay, everyone, thanks for hanging in there with me, for possibly shotgunning out too many videos at once. Talk to you all later.